All right, let's talk about laser cutting. Laser cutter is an awesome tool that lets you create designs from your computer onto various materials like cardboard, wood, or acrylic. The laser cutter can do two main things to your material. It can engrave into it and it can cut through it. So engraving is kind of like how a printer puts ink on paper, except the laser is burning an image onto the material, letting you create designs with shapes, text, or images. The process requires a little bit of setup and trial and error to get the best results, depending on the material that you're using. The laser cutter can also cut through material. You gotta make sure that the material is not too thick for the laser cutter that you're using and is appropriate to be cut. But this will allow you to cut precise shapes out of the material, from simple ones, just like squares, rectangles, etc., to complex designs that can actually interact and interlock with each other. For example, you can use a box designer tool to create a custom sized box for your material that you can use the laser cutter to cut out and assemble. There's one other that's kind of in between the engraving and the cutting. It's called scoring. Scoring is where you're going to do everything like you're cutting, but you're going to use lower power. The laser cutter cuts a very precise line onto the material without cutting all the way through. This is another way to create some detailed designs onto your material without cutting all the way through. You can combine any of these. You can engrave and score and cut all in one to create some really intricate pieces depending on your design. So, to set up your design, there are two kinds of images that you can use. There are raster images and there are vector images. Raster images are made up of thousands or millions of tiny points of colored light called pixels. That's how your computer screen makes pictures. These images can only be engraved because of the number of detailed points of light. Vector images are kind of like connect the dots, but at a really high complex level. You can create or find vector images online, and the laser cutter can use these vector images to cut or score your material. So to get something set up to laser cut, you need to set up your design. You can either create it or find it online. You need to decide if you're using raster, vector, or a combination to engrave onto it, cut or score it, or like I said, you could do both. You're going to open the laser specific software to get your settings on the laser cutter adjusted, adjust things like power and speed, and then you're going to send it to the laser cutter. After you've done that, you put your material into the laser cutter and you send the design from the computer to the laser cutter. Focus the laser cutter if you need to make sure that it will cut or engrave at the right setting. Some laser cutters you don't need to autofocus, some you do, so check on the specifics of your laser cutter. Finally, before you start cutting, turn on ventilation, and you need to stay with the machine while you're cutting for safety reasons. If something catches on fire or otherwise happens that you need to be there to respond quickly, you need to stay with the laser cutter. So as far as safety and best practices go, you never want to leave the laser cutter. Be in the same room, be close as you can to be able to see what is going on with your laser cut. And again, keep the workspace clean and organized. If you do cuts with the laser cutter and you leave behind small pieces, make sure you take those out so the next person doesn't have any interference with their piece that they're cutting. You keep it clean and you keep it safe. Once the laser cutter is done, you can remove your material, clean up, and reset the machine for the next person. If you have any other questions, drop them in the online forum, and I will be able to respond to them as quick as I can. But other than that, watch the video on the specifics of our laser cutter, and you are good to get going. Happy laser cutting.